Hello and welcome back to Muddy Boots Herbalist. I'm afraid there's been rather a paucity of content on this channel in the last couple of years, because it is now a couple of years since I last posted. Life got in the way and happened as it often does, and I found myself unable to devote the time required to making these videos. We live in very strange times at the moment with the current pandemic and subsequent lockdown in many parts of the world. And I find myself basically socially isolating at home and not doing so many of the other things that I was before, and now have time to make some more videos. So I'm going to share this video with you today and hope that it makes you ask some questions and maybe answer some questions you may have already had. I was going to try and avoid using the word to avoid being blacklisted on YouTube, but who cares? We're dealing in times of coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, novel coronavirus, call it what you will. This pathogen has emerged into the public and caused chaos in the past 3 months. Nobody 6 months ago would have believed that in 6 months' time the country would be, to all intents and purposes, locked down, with half of Europe being in the same situation and the United States locked down and many other regions facing similar measures. It would have just not crossed our public consciousness. I wanted to make this video to talk about how coronavirus affects our health, but more importantly, how our health affects coronavirus and what it means. I have been not working as usual for the past 2 months. Like I say, I have been socially isolating. But not isolated. I still have patients to whom I have a duty of care to provide care and to provide ongoing care for as long as the coronavirus crisis lasts and until I'm able to return to clinic as normal. When I graduated from university, there was sort of an implication, how and from where I'm not sure, but there was sort of an implication that now you're going to end up treating the middle, sort of the worried and slightly neurotic middle classes with skin conditions, menopause and stress and anxiety. And yeah, I have each of those conditions on my books multiple times over in patients I see. And this slightly disparaging way of talking is not useful, because any health complaint is valid if it's causing a loss of function and the loss of sovereignty over health to the sufferer. So I'm not interested in middle class conditions or lower class conditions or upper class conditions. I don't care whether you've got gout, whether you've got emphysema from working down a mine, or whether you've got midlife crisis. It doesn't matter. You've got a health concern that needs addressing. But the implication was very much that we were going to be secondary healthcare workers. And I was looking at some of my patient notes last night and realised that actually I do effectively provide frontline treatment for a number of people who aren't getting it elsewhere. So I have diabetes patients on my books who are not receiving what I would consider appropriate endocrinological care of their diabetes. Our next door neighbour, who's unfortunately no longer with us, who I didn't treat in a professional capacity, but who we helped in the later stages of her life, she had diabetes that was diagnosed outside of this area, and whenever the GP was reminded of this fact, or that it might not be being controlled properly, the response seemed to be, "Oh, that's interesting," and moved on and ignored the fact. And I use this case quite in particular because I distinctly remember him saying the words in my presence, "Oh, that's interesting." Well, shouldn't we reassess it? "Oh, probably," and moved on. There was no, okay, a problem has come up, let's make clinical examinations and tests and provide clinical treatment to mitigate the problem. It was just simply a case of, a bit like a stone in the road, "Oh, that's very interesting." No thought to actually digging up the stone or tarmacking over the stone or removing this health obstacle. It was just a fact of life that was not going to go away, and well, it doesn't go away, we'll just keep an eye on it. There was no actual treatment, and I use diabetes as an example quite loosely here. Our area, our NHS trust, has quite bad provisioning for diabetic services. There we are. I also have patients on my books with life-changing or potentially life-altering or ending cardiac problems. And I'm starting to get people coming to metaphorically see me in the form of Skype calls. And I'm trying to keep this to people that I know, at least socially, before the lockdown happened, because it is a grey area. But I'm starting to get people coming to see me who are being put on hold with their health. One lady I had a Skype consultation with a few days ago who was recently diagnosed with left ventricular cardiac failure and associated secondary pulmonary edema. And she had basically been told, take some bisoprolol, take some ramipril, and go away and we'll get around to seeing you and treating you when the coronavirus crisis is gone. And this lady has quite bad pulmonary edema. And I was asking her, well, did they give you any diuretics or anything like that, any frusemide? Oh, no, not at all. Okay. So what did they do? Oh, well, they gave me the ramipril and the bisoprolol. Well, okay, it might hold things until after the crisis, but it might not. This lady has got quite acute symptoms. And this mirrors the coronavirus crisis we find ourselves in. Our response to the coronavirus has been very much waged in the terms of a military conflict. This idea, and if you look at some of the language that is being used, we're winning the war, we are climbing over the peak, we are fighting the germs. These are all terms that are very confrontational and goal-oriented. But do we actually know what the goal is? Some would obviously say that the goal would be the elimination of the novel coronavirus. And in the short term, at least, that would be useful to eliminate this virus from our immediate surroundings, reduce the rate of transmission and so on. But now Pandora's box has been opened and this novel pathogen has got out. Whence it came, no one knows, but it's irrelevant, it's in the wild now and spreading. Pandora's box can't be closed. We can't just eradicate the thing by minimising all contact. How long is it going to take? Are we going to shut down the economies and lives of people across the world for another month, another 6 months, a year, 5 years? What's the price? And I find that the idea of using such militaristic language in dealing with a health complaint is not terribly useful. This idea that there's an army of a little microbiological pathogens scuttling around the earth, waging war, is not helpful. This is a systems problem, and when you have a systems problem, you're dealing with a complex system built of other systems that interact with each other. And going to war on one part of that system is no more useful than a dog picking its fleas. We need to ask ourselves what in the system has broken down and how is the system's function being changed, and how can we make a change back to get the system into optimal function. Western herbal medicine has a concept called vitalism. This is how good health has been considered in Western herbal medicine, certainly of those of us who practice in the physiomedicalist or eclectic traditions. And vitalism is an idea that good health is not simply the absence of illness, but it is actually a foundational inner resilience and inner strength. So yes, the absence of disease is critical in this, but the strength and vigour and energy of the human body, if suitably performant, will guarantee that disease stays at bay because the system is performing optimally. The more optimally it performs, the more optimally it gets, and so the more optimally it performs. And disease doesn't feature in this because the body's homeostasis, its state of being, is guaranteed not to let disease in, for want of a better word. One of the problems that we have in the modern world is that our immune systems are severely underexposed to microbiological challenges. we keep our homes and our environments too clean, and this can be seen by the dramatic increase in asthma in the last 50 years. Can you really believe that the cases of asthma in London are higher now than they were at the height of the Victorian pea-super smogs as a percentage of the population? It's true. Why? Because we live in such a microbiologically desolate world that the immune system doesn't end up fighting off opportunistic little infections. It doesn't have anything to do. So it goes looking for trouble, and it goes looking for trouble against things like pollen and other complex proteins that it thinks, oh, are you a germ? Should I attack you? I don't know. I think I should. You look like you might be up to no good. Yes, immune system, that's a gluten particle, or that's a pollen grain. But I don't know what a virus or a germ is. I'm going to attack that. I really should be attacking something. And that loss of function is very much the problem that we face with the coronavirus outbreak. The immune system is looking for something to attack in absence of something to attack, and it makes mistakes. And I fear that we're at risk of doing the same with coronavirus. I would say that the coronavirus outbreak, certainly in the UK, and I have figures here from Italy which are possibly some interest. They've actually tabulated figures, and I'll share them with you in a minute, would suggest that coronavirus is a public health emergency, not because people are going down with coronavirus, but because they're in a predisposed state to have complications of the coronavirus. Our general health has in some ways never been better. We live in a world free largely of communicable infectious diseases. I say largely because there are exceptions. But we don't have exposure to the normal low-level bacteria and viruses that give us good immunological function. Our lifestyle modifiable health is bad. We live in a world that is full of obesity. We live in a world that's full of under-involvement in exercise, where we tend to expose ourselves to high level of stress without physical resolution to that stress. And we end up having a disease called Westernitis, the life disease of people living in the modern Western system. And it seems, from these figures from Italy, that Westernitis is as much of a killer as the coronavirus. I'll share these figures, and I have these figures from an essay written by an American essayist called Charles Eisenstein. And he has an essay called The Coronation, which I will link to down below, and is highly worth reading, not just because of his consideration of health, public health, and the effects of the coronavirus on society, but also his question, where do we go from here? How do we go from here, and what society do we want to build when we get back to normal? Anyway, I want to share this quote, this paragraph from the essay. To understand the point about ground conditions, consider some mortality statistics from Italy, from its National Health Institute. I will link to the statistics, by the way, below as well in the comments, so you can see where I got this information from, where he got this information from. Of those analysed, less than 1% were free of serious chronic health conditions. Some 75% suffered from hypertension, 35% from diabetes, 33% from cardiac ischemia, and 24% from atrial fibrillation, 18% low renal function, and the balance made up of a few other conditions associated with. Nearly half of the deceased had 3 or more of these serious pathologies. Think about that. Okay, the data from Italy suggest that 1% or possibly more, we don't have the exact figures out yet, did not have a serious health complaint. But that's a pretty damning indictment of our general health, that coronavirus is killing so many people. But it seems only alongside these comorbidities. Now, of these conditions mentioned, how many are lifestyle modifiable? 75% suffered from hypertension. That's a lifestyle disease. That's, in a lot of cases, quite easily controllable with exercise, changes in diet, changes in stress. All things that we fail at as a modern society. 35% from diabetes. Again, you might not be able to control it very well with food alone when the disease is established, but it's a disease of indulgence and over consumption of carbohydrates and sugars. Let's be blunt. 33% from cardiac ischemia, again, probably caused by coronary arteries being blocked, probably caused by stress. The idea that coronary arteries get blocked, or arteries in general get blocked by plaques made of cholesterol that we eat is bunkum, of the most egregious nature. The cholesterol does form, but it's much more likely to form from inflammatory processes in the body as a result of stress. And there's numerous studies on that. Go and Google it in Google Scholar. 24% from atrial fibrillation. Okay, that's more of a challenge. It's the conduction system of the heart. Surprisingly large amount of atrial fibrillation, the onset of which is through long-term stress, leading to increased adrenaline on the heart, changing the conductivity of the heart. 18% from low renal function. Again, harder to tease out, but we do have quite an unhealthy renal system as a society due to things like aspartame. It's particularly damaging to the renal system, and many more, including possibly the overconsumption of protein. So, looking at these figures, we very soon realise that the main at-risk group is those of pre-existing health sufferers, most of whom have modifiable health complaints. Now, I'm not suggesting it's going to be possible in the middle of this crisis for people to run out and make improvements in their health when it comes to these lifestyle modifiable pathologies. I don't suggest that you've got hypertension, you should suddenly start going for a run tomorrow morning because that'll stop you catching coronavirus. It won't. What I want to set you up with in your mind as a question to ask is, have we given enough consideration over the past 40 years to our baseline health, to our vitality? In French endobiogenic medicine, there's a very nice analogy called the terrain, which is basically the idea that the body is made up of systems, terrains if you will, and if that terrain is working as it should be, its function is improved. So for case in point, look, literally terrain. If you have a grass lawn and throw potatoes on it, they're likely not to grow. If you dig up the grass lawn, they're likely to grow. Similarly, if you have a nicely dug bed of soil that you leave, weeds are going to colonise it. If it's covered with a pre-existing, say, grass lawn, weeds are not going to come into it. This is the terrain concept, or the ternary concept. And I would suggest that for the last 40, 50 years, we've seriously neglected our basal vitality, our basal health, and the concept of our terrain being conducive to health and inconducive to disease. Whether a pandemic arrives or not is irrelevant. These are things that we should be looking at anyway. Thousands die of flu each year in hospital who have pre-existing health conditions. And I'm not saying that coronavirus is the same as influenza. It's certainly far more virulent and far more, there's far higher morbidity with it. But we need to look at our own health before we look at factors coming in from the outside to challenge that health. And the systems thinking way of looking at coronavirus would be people who are dying with this condition are overwhelmingly in poor general health. Now is a great time and a salutary warning for everybody with pre-existing health conditions to seriously consider what they can do to improve their basal health and vitality. And of the 1% who didn't have any pre-existing health conditions, there will always be members of any population of human beings that have a health condition they do not know about. It wouldn't be the first time that during ECG training, for instance, we've picked up people that have a heart condition. they didn't know about it. We've just been dotting them up to practice, and suddenly they find, oh, this is an abdominal ECG. You might want to go and take this to your doctor and say that you've had this ECG and this is what you found. So there will always be a population within the population that have existing health complaints that aren't known. And I'm not saying that those in generally very good health should not be afraid of coronavirus. We need to be prudent in these times. But this is a salutary wake-up call to look at our basal health and the health of the whole ecosystem of the planet that we find ourselves living on. The system thinking way of looking at coronavirus is, how can we make ourselves resilient? That means good health, resilient society. How can we improve the Earth's resilience? That means to both us and our effects on it, and our effects on wildlife. For instance, the idea that the virus came from a bat is more than possible. There's a theory that as ecosystems collapse and animals find themselves in much closer contact with human beings, the rate of transmissibility of viruses increases due to close proximity. And as a society, how do we maintain the social functioning of that system, even in times of crisis like this? Because coronavirus kills, but so does isolation, so does depression, so does a feeling of disempowerment. So the system's way of thinking about this is to look at everything, not just the one aberration in the system, the coronavirus. I hope this video has made sense to you. I hope it set you up with some questions. And I hope it's inspired you, if you have an underlying health condition or are at risk of an underlying health condition developing, not to simply hope you don't catch coronavirus and take extra precautions, and that is very prudent and very laudable, but to use this opportunity to think, how can I improve my underlying health condition? How can I improve my function, my vitality? And how can I tone the terrain into a state in which it is more resilient to health challenges and my general health function improves overall? And that's the question to ask yourself today. I hope the return to these videos has been interesting. I'm going to do a follow-up to this video in the next few days, which is what is a medical herbalist doing in the time of these crises, because I'm doing quite a lot, just not visibly, and I'll share that video soon. In the meantime, as we say every time on Muddy Boots Herbalist, well, I do wedding. See you later.